The story of the Soviet Union begins with revolution and the desire for a new kind of government. At the dawn of the 20th century, Russia was ruled by the Romanov dynasty, a line of czars that had governed for over 300 years. Yet beneath the surface, the nation was a powder keg of social, political, and economic discontent. In 1917, two revolutions changed Russia forever. The first came in February, when protests and strikes in the capital, Petrograd, forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate. A provisional government took over, but it struggled to maintain control, and the country was still mired in the chaos of World War I. In October of the same year, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolshevik Party seized power in what would be known as the October Revolution. Lenin and his followers were inspired by Marxist ideas, believing in a classless society and a government led by the working class. The early years of the Soviet Union were marked by radical changes. Under Lenin, the government took control of all industries, banks, and lands. Private property was abolished, and the state directed all economic activity. But this new system also led to severe hardships, including famines and a lack of consumer goods. When Lenin died in 1924, a power struggle emerged. Eventually, Joseph Stalin rose to power, and his rule would forever shape the Soviet Union. Under Stalin, the Soviet Union transformed into a global superpower, but at a tremendous cost. Stalin implemented a series of 5-year plans to rapidly industrialize the economy and increase agricultural output. However, these plans were brutal. Stalin forced millions of peasants onto collective farms, resulting in widespread famine, most famously in Ukraine. Millions died from starvation, and Stalin's secret police cracked down on dissent. The Great Purge saw thousands of people, including top government and military officials, arrested, imprisoned, or executed. Yet despite these brutal tactics, Stalin achieved his goal. By the late 1930s, the Soviet Union had become one of the world's leading industrial powers. When World War II began, the USSR initially signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany. However, in 1941, Hitler broke the pact and invaded the Soviet Union. The USSR suffered immense losses, but under Stalin's leadership, they pushed the Germans back, eventually capturing Berlin in 1945. The victory in World War II established the Soviet Union as a superpower, but it also marked the beginning of a new global conflict, the Cold War. In 1985, a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power with a bold vision for change. Gorbachev introduced two major policies: perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness. Perestroika aimed to reform the economy by introducing some market-like reforms, allowing limited private business, and reducing the state's control over production. Glasnost, on the other hand, opened up Soviet society, encouraging freedom of speech and reducing censorship. These policies were intended to strengthen the USSR, but they also exposed its deep-rooted problems. As Gorbachev's reforms unfolded, the consequences were profound. Glasnost led to an outpouring of criticism against the government, as people began to openly discuss long-suppressed issues, including the failures of past leaders and the atrocities of Stalin's era. Nationalist movements grew in the republics within the Soviet Union, particularly in places like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, where people were eager to gain independence. Meanwhile, the Soviet economy was deteriorating. The government's attempts at reform were too little, too late, and many of Gorbachev's policies led to unintended consequences. Industrial output declined, inflation rose, and people's frustrations grew. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall marked a turning point in the Cold War. Eastern European countries, once loyal to the Soviet Union, began rejecting communist rule. Gorbachev decided not to use military force to maintain control, effectively allowing the Eastern Bloc to break free. The collapse of the Soviet Union ended one of the most significant chapters of the 20th century. It brought an end to the Cold War, changed the global political landscape, and left lasting effects on the world. The newly independent states faced immense challenges, from economic hardship to political instability. Meanwhile, Russia, the largest successor state, struggled to redefine itself in a post-Soviet world. Today, the Soviet Union is remembered with a complex legacy. It was a nation that aspired to create an equal society, but often relied on force and oppression to maintain control. It became a superpower, challenging the dominance of the United States, but it eventually fell under the weight of its contradictions and inefficiencies. The story of the Soviet Union serves as a reminder of the power and the limits of ideology, and it remains a topic of deep fascination and study across the world.